Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm Jennifer Evelyn, and today is June 8th. It was on this day, June 8th in 1698, that the English writer, landowner, and diarist John Evelyn went to Deptford to, quote, see how miserably the Tsar left my house after 3 months of making it his court. In 1698, John Evelyn had owned his estate for 40 years, and everyone who knew it said it was magnificent, both inside and out. It was decorated to the nines, and of all he accomplished, John's garden was his pride and joy. Well, that year, the Russian Tsar Peter the Great brought an entourage of 200 people to England to visit William III, and in a gesture of hospitality, William volunteered John Evelyn's home to host the Tsar and his people during their visit. Now, John and his wife graciously moved out to give the Tsar his privacy, but it wasn't long before John's servants began sending urgent messages begging him to return. And when John returned home on this day, June 8th, he walked in to a nightmare. The whole estate had been trashed. Priceless paintings had served as dartboards. His floors were ruined, windows were smashed, and even the garden was damaged. The servants told how the 6'8" Tsar, I didn't realize Peter the Great was that tall, had played a game with his friends where they put him in one of John's wheelbarrows and then raced him through the garden beds, crashing into walls, trees, and hedges. And so when John returned home on this day, it must have been a scene akin to the movie Animal House. Clearly, the Tsar had shown a complete disregard for the sanctity of John's home and garden. And as gardeners, we can for sure imagine how John must have felt. For 20 years, John had nursed along that hedge of holly that had turned into a glorious living wall. And John, who was a noted expert on trees and woody plants, was particularly proud of that hedge. And he wrote, "Is there under heaven anything more glorious and refreshing than an impregnable hedge of about 480 feet in length, 9 feet high, and 5 feet in diameter?" That was quite the hedge. But sadly, it too was ruined by the Tsar, and even the hardscapes were no match for the Tsar's party, as even part of the stone wall that surrounded the garden was toppled over. After this day, John immediately sent word to the king about what had happened. Arrangements were made straight away to move the Tsar and his group to other lodgings. King William paid to have the Evelyn home fully restored, which was no small task because the house needed to be gutted and rebuilt from the floors up. Now, keep in mind that John Evelyn was 78 years old on this day when this happened to him, and I'm sure that there was no amount of restitution that could restore the years of love that he had spent in his garden. John Evelyn lived for another 8 years before dying in 1706. Today, John is remembered for his detailed diary that he kept for 66 years. As a passionate gardener, many of his entries pertain to plants or related garden topics. John believed that gardening was a year-long endeavor and that the experience of gardening provided immeasurable benefits. John once wrote, "The gardener's work is never at an end. It begins with the year and continues to the next." And he also wrote, "Gardening is a labor full of tranquility and satisfaction, natural and instructive, and aids the most serious contemplation, health, and longevity. And today we remember Sophia of Hanover, who died on this day, June 8th in 1714. Sophia was the Electress of Hanover, and she died at 83. Sophia was next in line to become Queen of England, but she never got the chance. She was strolling through her magnificent garden in Hanover, Germany on this day when she was caught in a rainstorm, and after she rushed to find shelter, she collapsed and died of heart failure. Today, a sculpture memorial of Electress Sophia stands on the southern edge of the garden. In 1714, after Sophia died on June 8th, her cousin Queen Anne died just 2 months later at the beginning of August. And this is how Sophia's eldest son was able to claim the British throne as George I. Today, both Sophia and her son, George I, are buried in the very garden that she ran out of over 3 centuries ago. Incidentally, George I became the last British monarch to be buried outside of Britain. And while it's unfortunate that Sophia got caught in the rain while she was out in her garden, there is no doubt that the beautiful grounds that she had installed at Herrenhausen Palace in Hanover brought her great joy. Sophia once said, "The garden is my life." As a patron of the arts, it was Sophia who commissioned Herrenhausen Palace and the surrounding gardens, which still remain the greatest treasure in all of Hanover. As one of the most important historical gardens in Europe, Herrenhausen Gardens is one of the few Baroque gardens remaining on the continent. And the garden remains true to its original design, and it comprises 4 separate gardens that feature over 60,000 blooming flowers and over 1,000 containers. The Baroque garden, also called the Big Garden, is home to 32 magnificent statues made of sandstone, and the sculptures represent the 4 continents, the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, and the gods of the ancient world. And a statue of the Roman goddess Juno standing next to a swan is particularly stunning. Herrenhausen also encompasses Georgengarten, which is a beautiful English-style park, and Berggarten, which is a botanic garden that features orchids and cactus. In 2020, the director of Herrenhausen Gardens, Ronald Clark, presented garden thinking and garden behavior. He defined garden thinking as tending a garden in such a way that it produces harmony with nature. And he defined garden behavior as garden thinking put into action. Ronald said, "Let us start small and look at a private garden. Which plants do we find there? Are there any at all? Many gardens reflect how we deal with our surroundings. Again, let's start small and look just past our patio door. Is gardening really labor? Of course, a garden takes time, but no generation before us has had this much leisure time, and caring for a garden is one of the most meaningful and fulfilling opportunities." And it was on this day, June 8th in 1908, that a review of the Peterson Nursery in Chicago offered an update on their annual Peony Week. Here's what they wrote. About 8,000 peonies were cut on June 8th, and perhaps the finest sight of all the varieties during our visit was the good old Festiva Maxima with its snowy white flowers and red flecks. And William Peterson has over 500 5-year-old Festiva Maxima peonies, and every one of them was covered with flowers during our visit. Well, peonies are a beloved flower. They are the national flower of China, where they're native, and where they're also called shoyu, which means beautiful. Now, there are two main types of peonies. There are tree peonies and there are herbaceous peonies. Now, tree peonies are deciduous shrubs. They can have huge, colorful, dinner plate-sized blossoms. And then the herbaceous peonies are the ones that die back every winter and return every spring. Herbaceous peonies make the gorgeous cut flowers that we all know and love. And the blousy blooms come in shades of white, pink, coral, and crimson. And now, this may surprise you because the largest peony cut flower operation is in Holland, the same place where they grow all those tulips. Well, today, the Netherlands sells 50 million peonies every single year. And the most popular variety by far is Sara Bernhardt, which accounts for 20 million stems. And the roughly pink-petaled Sara Bernhardt peony with emerald green foliage was bred by none other than the French plant breeder Victor Lemoine. And the Sara B peony, as it's called, debuted in 1906, and Victor named the peony in honor of the French stage actress named Sara Bernhardt. Now, if you are a peony lover and you want to grow herbaceous peonies, don't forget these two crucial planting tips for flourishing blossoms. The first is to plant them in full sun, and the second is to plant your peonies high. If you bury the peony crown too deeply, it will not flower, and you'll just have this massive green leaves. So if that's happening to you right now, make sure to lift up your peony and expose the crown so that you can get some flowers next year. Finally, don't forget that those pretty peony petals are edible, and you can impress your guests and children by elevating a humble salad with peony petals or using crystallized peony petals to dress up baked goods like cupcakes or a basic sheet cake. And today we celebrate the birthday of the American mystery writer Sara Paretsky, who was born on this day, June 8th, in 1947. In her book Fallout, Sara's character, Doris, imagines heaven as a garden in this excerpt. Doris thought life was like a high-speed train where you kept leaving friends and brothers and lovers at stations along the route. Maybe when you died, you walked back down the tracks until you met each of the people you'd lost. You collected them all, Brother Logan, Mother, Father, Lucinda, and then you got to find a quiet garden where you sat and watched the sun go down, the huge red gold Kansas sun sinking behind the waves of wheat, while you sipped a little bit of a martini that your beloved had mixed for you. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Take It Outside by Mel Brazier, Garrett McGee, and James DeSantis. This book came out in 2021, and the subtitle is A Guide to Designing Beautiful Spaces Just Beyond Your Door. Well, Mel, Garrett, and James are the hosts of Bravo's Backyard Envy, and they've been called plantfluencers, I love that term, by the New York Times, and they also own the Manscapers Landscaping Company, although I want to make sure that you know that Mel is a girl. So keep that in mind. It's not just three guys, even though their company name is Manscapers. But the main differentiator of this trio of very talented people is viewing outdoor spaces the way interior designers evaluate rooms. And in this book, Mel, Garrett, and James take you step by step through their process of transforming outdoor spaces, no matter the size. And this makes complete sense once you understand their background, which they reveal in the introduction to the book. They wrote this: "The three of us came to the landscape business with backgrounds in design, not degrees in horticulture. Mel and James are interiors experts, and Garrett trained as a graphic designer. Together, we decided to pool our talents and take our collective skill set outside. We learned to transform city lots into lush hideaways, tiny terraces into chic outdoor lounges, and suburban yards into anything but cookie-cutter retreats. Along the way, we realized that no matter the size, location, or budget of any outdoor location, the makeover process is pretty much the same. And rather than be put off by the unpredictability of garden design, we fell in love with its ever-changing nature. Today, we are constantly inspired by the process of working outside, where every project mirrors the seasons and offers the promise of transformation and progress. And then I love what they say here, nothing is stagnant outside. And I experience the same thing when I'm working with my student gardeners in the summer. So I completely get this. And then they write, time and again, we're faced with many of the same landscape design conundrums, but we're always up to the challenge of solving them. And with this book, we're stoked to share our tried and true tricks and solutions with anyone who wants to design and build their own outdoor oasis. So whether you're a seasoned or brand new gardener, a semi-skilled DIYer, or someone who just wants to turn things over to the pros, we'll help unpack the process for you. Now, let's take this outside and get started. And I love that. They're conversational and hip tone. It's throughout the book. And these three bring an energy and an enthusiasm for garden design that you maybe don't see from classically trained designers. So I find this book to be a fresh take on garden design. I find it to be very modern, very hip, and very engaging. This book is 272 pages of planning outdoor spaces worthy of an episode of Backyard Envy, and the authors are quick to point out that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to landscape design. They say you don't have to become a gardening expert. You don't even have to love flowers. You just need to understand a few basic landscaping principles and how to apply them to the space that you're working with. And they've streamlined the process into manageable steps that can work in any area. And another wonderful aspect of this book is that you can dip in and out of it. You can cherry pick the tips and ideas that speak to you. It's whatever works for you. And Mel, Garrett, and James remind us that the goal is to experience your home in a different way, from the outside in, which was the inspiration for the title of this book. You can get a copy of Take It Outside by Mel Brazier, Garrett McGee, and James DeSantis, and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $16. And it's a great book. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark that features peonies. It was on this day, June 8th in 2009, that Martha Stewart's peonies bloomed. And in her 2011 book called Entertaining: A Year of Celebrations, Martha wrote this: "For the last few years, I have had a peony party, scheduling the date to coincide with what I thought would be the apex of the blooming of hundreds of peony plants. Unfortunately, global warming has played havoc with such schedules, and it's now almost impossible to judge accurately when a plant is going to bloom. 2 years ago, the peonies bloomed on June 8th. 1 year ago, they bloomed on May 28th, and this past year, they bloomed closer to May 20th. I am now trying to find more varieties with longer blooming periods and more with early, mid-season, and late blooming properties. And that's a great idea to extend your peony season by paying attention to bloom time." Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. Be sure to share the show with any garden friends that you think might enjoy it. And as always, just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Evelyn. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.